Hello everybody, my name is Mark Spevic, and in this video I'm going to teach you how to set up this cool burning tree effect using just the Pyro shelf tools in Houdini. Let's pop over to Houdini. If you load the supplied scene, you'll see it consists of a tree geometry, a camera and a light. We're going to set fire to the tree, and for that we're going to use the shelf tools at the top of the interface in Houdini. We're going to use the shelf tool set on the right hand side here, and you'll find a tab over to the right called Pyro Effects. It's got a bunch of buttons, and most of these buttons create the same network just with different settings. In order to use the shelf tool, you're going to click on a button, but you must make sure first of all in your network view that no geometry is selected, otherwise the shelf tool will operate on your selection, and that may or may not be what you want. So I'm going to left click in the network view here to make sure nothing is selected, and I'm going to choose the Flames button. If I click on the Flames button, I get a prompt at the bottom of the 3D view here. Please select your object to burn and press enter to accept the selection. I'm going to select the tree and I'm going to hit enter with my cursor over the 3D view. Houdini will then take us to the Pyro network that it's created, and if I press play I can see the result of it, and it's a little bit heavy. If I zoom out a little, we can see what's going on. The flames are coming out and they're shooting right up, and they're within this container. This container is the limit of the simulation, and you can see it's very large. It's very large with respect to my initial tree. The bigger the container is, the more memory we take, and we just don't need it to be this big. I want my tree flames eventually to only be about this high above the tree. So this is overkill. So the first thing we can do is make this more efficient by resizing the container. So in order to do that, we go to the smoke object node here called Pyro, and if you select it, put your cursor over the 3D view and hit enter, you can get the interactive handles. If I just pull down on the top here, just to give that a much better height for my tree, and I'll lift up the bottom because there's no flames below the tree. I could do all four sides manually, but I'm going to type in the values here in the smoke object node. So we'll have 2.7 in X and 2.7 in Z to keep it square, and we'll center the X and Z so it's centered around the tree correctly. As you can see, that's centered around the tree. So if I press play now, you'll see the inner box starts off small, but then it resizes and matches the limits of the box we've just resized ourselves. So the simulation will never get any bigger than this. So this is much more efficient. There's another issue, and that is this stepping at the sides here. This container is divided into little boxes, and these can be thought of as 3D pixels. In fact, they are called voxels, which is volume pixels if you like. These are denoted by the ticks at the side here. And in Houdini, 1 unit is 1 meter. So the division size here on the smoke object node tells us that these are 10 centimeters large. That's too large for what we want to do. We can see the stepping. Let's drop this to 0.05, which is effectively 5 centimeters. If I rewind and press play, we'll see the stepping still there, but it's much smaller. If I take the division size smaller again to 0.02 and press play, we'll see that there is very little stepping, but it's going very, very slow. It's going slow because of the large number of voxels we're having to calculate. But the good thing is the stepping is so small that we can't see it from this distance. If I zoom in, obviously I'll see the stepping, and I'll have to decrease the division size even further. Now fortunately we can speed things up. Houdini can take advantage of your graphics card, and it does that through the Pyro Solver node here. If you select the Pyro Solver node and go to Advanced, you can turn on Use OpenCL, and this will allow you to take advantage of the CUDA cores in your graphics card. If I press play now, you'll see the performance is much better. It goes a lot faster for this resolution. So I'm happy with that. What I'm not happy with is the amount of flames coming off here, and that's because I have a lot of fuel. If we look at my tree, it's coarsely represented here, and this is the fuel. It's very blobby. So let's fix that first. If I tap U to come out of this network, I'll just tidy up this network view a little bit better to make more sense. This is our tree geometry, this is the simulation, and these are the flames from the sim that we're going to render. I'm going to go inside my tree geometry to see what Houdini's created. Here's our initial geometry, and then we have this create fuel node which is creating these dots, and you'll see they're quite widely separated. We can decrease the separation between them here, which will effectively increase the number of points, and you'll see it represents the tree a lot better. If I look at my outfuel now, you'll see indeed it does represent the tree a lot better because we have a much higher resolution of points to resolve it with. It's important with Pyro Sims to have a very nice emitter, of varying emission and velocities. That way you'll get very nice flames coming off it. So I want to make more variation to this, and to do that I can use the Add Noise node. First thing I'd like to do is just add some more contrast here, and I can do that by dropping the minimum to -2.5. As you'll see, there's more contrast in the noise. But now I can see the noise pattern is too large. So let's just decrease the element scale here to make the noise pattern smaller, 0.15. There we go, it's much more broken up. Now this will change over time, and I want it to change quite quickly, and that's driven by this pulse duration. If I drop it to 0.2 and press play, you'll see actually it's quite slow to preview. It's slow to preview because in Houdini I've got what we call ghosting on up here. What the ghosting does in this icon, it displays the other networks that are simulating in Houdini, so you can see them in context of the network you're in. For some reason my button's not turning up. There we go. So if you turn hide other objects on, then you won't see the other networks, and we're not having to simulate the Pyro. Now I can see how quickly my noise pattern is changing here. I'm happy with that. That will give an interesting seat for the flames. I'm going to turn the ghosting back on. I'm going to come up. Oh, before I do that, let me just turn the tree back on. Let's go up one and back inside the Pyro network. Now if I press play, let's see the result of that. Because we have a much better fidelity of the tree and not so much fuel, we've not got all this heavy flame coming off there. And it looks better. In fact, I would like a little bit more flame coming off there. Let's just increase the fuel inside the simulation. To do that, we can go to the volume source node. If we select this, we can see that we're bringing in fuel, temperature and velocity, and I can scale up the amount of fuel coming in. Let's increase this to 1.5. If I press play again, you'll see it's a lot hotter. We've got more fuel, we have more density of flame, and I want to see how this looks. Now it's very difficult to preview it like this, so what I'm going to do is just stop this, and I'm going to flipbook this to see how it looks. If you right click, you can choose flipbook menu settings and just hit start. This will take a second or two, so I'm just going to pause the video while this happens. I've just let this go for a few frames, and as we can see, we have a lot more density of fuel, of flames because of the more fuel, and it's a lot hotter and rising a lot higher than I wanted. And we can see it's going up quite a lot. Now, I quite like the density of the flame, but I'd like to affect how high it's going. Now, there's an easy couple of ways to do this in Houdini. As we all know, heat rises. So if we can affect the way that this burns. Now, to do that, you can do that on the Pyro Solver node. And we're going to go to the Simulation tab. So heat rises, so what I'm going to do is actually make it cool down quicker. So as it's rising up, it's going to cool down and hopefully not go so far. And we can do that with the cooling rate here. I'm going to increase this to 0.99. Another good way to control the flame height is to go to the Combustion tab, and where it says Flames here, we can adjust the flame height. Let's bring that down to 2. These two things impact the flame height quite considerably. In order to preview that, I need to press play again. And that's going to take a second or two, so I'll flipbook it to see the result. And I'll just pause the video again while the flipbook happens. Now the flipbook has occurred. If I press play, we can see having made it cool down a lot faster and reducing the flame height, it's not shooting up so high, and we're getting a lot more of these sort of licks at the top here that flames do, which I quite like. I'm happy with this. The last thing for me to do now is flipbook one last time at a much higher resolution, so we can see those smaller features and details in the flames. So to do that, I'm going to select the Pyro node here. I'm going to take the division size to 0.008, and I'm just going to flipbook this one last time. So just have patience while I pause the video. Thank you. Now the flipbook is complete, and if I press play, you can see we have a much better fidelity because of the smaller division size, much better resolution. We get some nice flicks and some nice details here. Just shut that down, and what I'm going to do is just increase the division size slightly, and I'm going to click on a few frames into the simulation here, and that's going to get it to step forwards. The reason is I want to talk about rendering this now. I quite like that flipbook and the details, and this is the trick to Pyro. You want to get all the motion and animation working first and worry about the shading later. So I'm just going to pause the video while this steps forwards, and then we'll come back and have a look at how to render it. There we go. We've jumped forwards to frame 36 here. So how are we going to render this? Well, at the moment we're seeing this in the viewport here, and we're using these visualizers here, particularly this multi-field. If I click on it, you can see that we're using density field here, and in the emission we're using temperature and heat. These are actually the wrong way round. if you right click on the word emission here, you can actually revert them to defaults. The defaults are actually empty in this case, but you want to type heat in this top one, and you want to type temperature in this bottom one. We use the temperature for colouring, and we use the heat for the hotness or the brightness of the flame. We can increase the heat brightness here in the emission scale, or drop it down again, as you can see. And more importantly, we can find out sort of the range of the ranges that we're dealing with. Down here you'll see the temperature has a colour range between 0 and 2. This is the hottest part, this is the coolest, so this will be around about a value of 2. If I say it's 1, what we'll see is we have a lot of values higher than 1, so they've all clipped out to the white. If I put a value of 5, then I don't think we've got anything hitting 5, so we'll see nothing that's white. So we can see where sort of our hottest areas are. If I just increase this slightly, we can see they're between 2 and 3 for the temperature. This gives us an idea on how we're going to shade it. This is not necessarily what it will look like in the renderer. Now for shading, we're going to use this material. In the material palettes, we're going to use this shader called Flames. And if you have a look, it's very similar. We have sort of a fire intensity here, and then we have the fire and the control over the fire and the temperature in these two tabs. As you'll see, they are again also set up incorrectly. I think that's the preset with the shelf. If we right click on the word here, we can do revert to defaults, and you'll see it will switch to the right way round. So you right click on fire temperature, and that reverts to the default. So we have the temperature field colouring it, and we have the heat field for the intensity. If we click back on the general tab, this is the colour mode. We can switch between a colour ramp and a black body ramp. I'll show you what those are in a sec. And we can control the brightness here. So how do we render this? Well, we need to create a Mantra render node. In order to do that, we click on the render tab up here, create render node, and we can click on Mantra. And this will create, if we click on the tab here for the out context, we'll see that I've actually got a couple there. Let me create that again. We can we get a Mantra node here. So if we click on the render view tab, we can render that node just by clicking on the button render here. And then what Houdini will do will translate the scene and then send it off to the renderer. Now when you open up the render view here, you'll see these little bars at the top. If you click on them, they'll open up extra bits of the menu. That is, if you zoom in and out, you can rehome it here. And we've got color controls at the bottom, things like exposure. If you change it, it goes yellow, but you can means it's not at the default value. If you want to reset it to the default, just left click on the icon. So we've got contrast again, and brightness, and gamma. And again, I'm left clicking on the icon to reset those. You'll see this is constantly updating. This is the progressive render. I'm not that keen on it, so I'm going to turn it off with this button here, and this will just force it to actually render the tiles to their completeness straight away. And you'll notice I'm left clicking and it's actually rendering underneath my cursor. So this gives us an idea of our flame, and that looks okay at the minute. Now this is quite slow to render, so let me just stop it here with the stop button, and I'm just going to change a few settings to speed myself up. When I do shader work, I like to work very quickly with a lot of iterations, so I need my render to be optimized. So the first thing I do is turn on override camera resolution, so we're going to render half res, and I can go to the rendering tab, drop the pixel samples down, and also these ray samples we can bring right down, and we can turn the rest of these off. We're not interested in the indirect lighting at the minute, I'm just interested in how my shader looks. You can also go to the limits tab and bring down the number of ray bounces here as well. The other thing is we want to turn on motion blur here in the rendering tab. Flames always look good with motion blur. If I hit render now, we'll see that it still has time to takes time to translate the scene. Let me click on this home button, but the overall it will render a lot faster to give us a much better idea of what the shader is going to look like. So I'm going to click on my material palettes here while that's happening, and I'm going to click on the Flames shader. So a very brief look at how this works. Let me just click around to get that to render faster. Incidentally, actually, you can also hold down Shift and left click and drag in your viewport to create a render region, and then it will only render within this region. Again, that can optimize your rendering speed. So here in the shader, we can do things like increase the density scale. If I put a big value in, we'll see there is actually density in here that in the form of the smoke. But in this case, I want that to be fairly transparent. So I probably don't want it as heavy as the number I've just put in, but look, as I start rendering, you'll see we can really start to see the smoke is quite dense here. So let me put this back to 0.4 because I want the smoke to be fairly transparent. We also have this intensity scale here. This is the brightness of the flame. Let's put a value of 10 in, and we'll see we'll make everything seem a lot brighter and hotter. Now against the colours from this colour ramp, the hottest areas are over to the right of the ramp and the coolest areas are to the left. So we'll see we're going from these colours from white to yellow to orange, and we'll see some whites here in the hottest parts of our flame. We can change these colours around and move the different regions. So here's more white over the more as it cools down a bit more. So we'll see that we'll get more white spreading out. Especially if I bring that up here. See the white areas are getting bigger. And we can mess around with the colours and actually make whatever kind of coloured flame that we want, or do something very custom. So that's the advantage of using a colour ramp. We can also set this to a physical black body. So what that means is that the colours are dictated by the actual temperature, are physically accurate. Physicists have noticed that when things heat up, they change colour. So this is what this is doing. It's remapping the temperature field to those natural colours. And we can see where it's cool, we're getting this sort of orangey red, and where it's hot, we're still burning out to white. You can control this a little bit here. If you want this to look overall brighter, you can increase the colour temperature here to something like 8000. And this will brighten up the overall flames. As you see, it's much hotter. And if you want to cool it down, you can bring this down to something like 3000. And this cools down the overall flames. I quite like the preset, so I'm going to right click and do revert to defaults. Thought that range looked pretty good for our flames. The other thing you'll notice is I can't actually see my tree here. Let me stop the render. The reason I can't see the tree, let me click back on the matte context here. In fact, let me click on this drop down and click on OBJ to see the geometry again. The reason we can't see the tree is if we go inside the tree network, this null is set to render and it's not connected to anything. So if I connect my tree to that null, go back to the render view and hit render, we should now see the tree geometry inside the flames here, and that will give them a bit better definition. Just to help us understand what's happening more in this image. So I'll just give that a second to kick off, because now it's got to bring the tree geometry in. And there we go, and we can see the tree up the center of our fire here. Notice again I'm left clicking where I want it to render, so we can just speed up what I see. And I can see my tree there engulfed in the flames. All that's left to do now really to see this working is to make an animated kind of a rendered flip book. So to do that I'm going to click on these little tab here and click on out, because that's where my mantra node is. And at the top here I'm going to say render frame range. That's right, then I'm going to just hit render to mplay, and then hopefully I'm just going to pause the video and then we'll come back when that's rendered a few of the frames and we can see how our animation that we already know works from the flipbook looks with that particular shader. So I'll just pause the video for a second and we'll come back soon. So the render is complete. If I press play on my flipbook, we can see that that looks just like our animation and the shading looks quite good now. So all that's left to do now is turn off this override camera resolution, so it will render at full size, and increase the, where are we, in the rendering tab here, in the sampling tab below that, increase the pixel samples until you get a quality that you like. And then at the very top just hit render to disk and off you go. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you. Bye bye.